and of course, that nice, beautiful peanut glazed alligator on the back. I actually, when I was cleaning my shop out back in January, I found this alligator that I had. I had no idea I'd bought it. I just had it sitting there. So I was like, oh, well, this is the perfect use for it. But look at how spectacular that looks there. That is just magnificent. These little skins are very nice because you get all that nice, beautiful scale pattern there. I like the big ones and I like the little ones too. They each have their own use. I think this one definitely was the right use for this skin here. So I'm looking forward to finishing this up. And really, the thing I'm most excited about is taking pictures of it. These badge wallets are just impressive as all hell when they're all said and done. You get the nice badge, or nice brass of the badge in there against the blue. So I think this will be very, very neat when it's done. But to anybody who just hopped in after the music load up there, I'll run through it one more time. We're going to talk a little bit about some burnishing today. We're going to be putting together a Buttero mid wallet, and that is burnished at the edges there. So we'll show a couple things about that and the way I do it in particular, and hopefully you pick up something you didn't know today. I'm going to put back over here to continue resting. Let's get into it. Got my scratch alls here. So like I said, I have everything cut out, pretty much ready to go. I've got the top edges of these all burnished and set. This is just a 0.8mm yellow Buttero. And the nice thing about working with this particular thickness is you really don't need to skive it really at all for most parts. I do the backing, I'll skive, but generally these here were good. The customer was actually not local to me. They're from New Jersey, so not local PD. Somebody who was referred to me by my good friend Michael Strickland of Loyal Strickland. He used to do a lot of badge wallets, but as I discover every single time I do one, they're very difficult to do, and they're very time-consuming. So he kind of got out of doing them just because he really didn't have the time for it. And me, I was actually looking for a challenge. I love everything I made last year, but I made a lot of the same things, and that's, you know, to be expected when you specialize in something. But the challenge is important. Having to kind of figure your way around something, I think, is very important for people to have to do from time to time. And that wallet in particular is one of the projects I'll remember to where my understanding and my conception of what it was and how it was going together changed almost daily. Almost every day I would change my mind about how it had to do, or I would discover something that had to be changed on it just to make it work. And that is one of the ones that is it is certainly one of the most difficult ones I've done in a long time. I came to discover that the ID wallet, the ID that he has to carry, is much larger than a regular ID. It is not a standard credit card size. It's like larger than a playing card. So I had to redesign the entire wallet around that. And then when I had it in hand, you're seeing just how thick the badge was itself. That changed everything. So pretty much every single day I'd wake up and think, okay, no, I can't do it like I was going to do, like I thought I was going to do yesterday. I've got to do it this way. And then I would change my mind again the next day until it just kind of went together the way it did. And it looks great, but it was definitely an experience I'm not seeking to repeat anytime soon just yet. One is enough for now. The first thing we have to do with these to make this work, these go together quite quickly because there's only one hard slot to be stitched. So we're just going to go ahead and take our scratch awl. We're going to scuff around the edges to get our glue to bind. And all you're seeking to do here, just scratching the surface. Ideally, you're trying to pull up some of the underlying fibers that will let it bond to that. And with my template, I have everything marked out already with the scratch awl, so I know where to go with everything. It shows up really good on the camera. About that. This wallet's being done in yellow Buttero and black Buttero because the future owner graduating from Purdue University. They're graduating from or going to Purdue, I'm not sure. But they want it done in Purdue colors. Which I'm told are black and gold. So I think the yellow, that looks pretty good, pretty much gold to me. Glue we're using, that I use for pretty much all of Edgetan, is just the Sewa water-based PVA glue. It's almost Elmer's, as far as I can tell. I can tell very little difference between it. Looks the same, smells the same, tastes the same. And it works great. I like using it for wallets because it's not, unlike a contact glue, it is not an instant bond. You get a little bit of working time with it. If you put something down and have to shift it a little bit, you're not immediately stuck with it. There. We're going to take our glass slicker down. There. And this glue, for not being a contact-based glue, sets almost immediately. So pretty much within 30 to 60 seconds, that is good to work with, and you're fine. You do not have to worry about it delaminating or anything like that. It's a really excellent glue. And that actually has already set enough to where I feel safe punching the holes for the bottom. There. Side, try to keep everything out of the way. And what I did there, if you haven't seen me doing it before and after I stitch, I like to hit the stitching holes with a hammer, and that closes them back up. Get a little bit of a cleaner stitch out of that. It doesn't really matter on something that you're not going to see, which this being hidden underneath the other card slot you will never see, but it's good practice just to do. Out. And this is going to go so quickly, I don't think I'm going to bother adjusting the camera here. I'm just going to do it right here on the side camera to stitch this together. Just because it doesn't make much sense to shift everything around for that just yet. We'll do that later when I do the longer stitch run, but for now, we're just going to do it. Oh, big gust of wind blowing all the petals off my pear tree. This here, we're just stitching down the bottom of this card slot. This is what keeps the card from falling through the bottom of it. I was doing this earlier today. I somehow been having bad luck stitching recently. Somehow got the needle completely turned around in my hand. Just punched it right into the center of my finger. That's what got a nice little hydrocolloid bandage on there. That was a surprise. Normally doesn't happen to me too often, but in the past couple days it's happened several times, and I don't know why. Guess I'll get them all out of the way now. Oh, and this is just about done. Do the back stitch. No special back stitch needed for this because, again, this is hidden. This is not a stitch you ever see. You just do a normal doubled up back stitch for this. As usual, I like to glue in stitches. Just gotta take it all, put a little bit of glue on each end of the thread. Pull it tight. Nip it. And now the key to doing a glued in thread is that immediately after you pull the stitches tight with the glue on it, you want to get it and hammer it closed. That way that ensures that your stitching hole closes up around the glue and really grips it. And these are pretty darn strong. You can go and try and pull that out after it sets, and you'll be surprised how sturdy that actually is. For being as thin that it is and just holding on to polyester thread, works pretty well. Clean the needles, throw my thread away. Again, having cats around, I like to be kind of militant about making sure my needles are all put away, and especially any loose thread. God forbid if they decide to get curious and eat it. As you can see, we're moving along pretty quickly with that already. Now it's time to glue this outer card slot over top of it. As I like to do when I'm putting these together, I like to put card in the preceding card slot. Speaking of, hello. Oh, come here. Hold on one second. Come here. Say hello. Going to be a cheerful boy. Look at this little lad. Yeah, it's the lad. And if I'd have left that thread out there, he would have been absolutely interested in getting it. You gonna look out the window? You gonna look at those birds? Now, last week I couldn't get you to come down here for anything. Now you're just showing up. Showing up of your own accord. Huh. That bad tail. What do you see out there? What are you doing? Yeah. A good little lad. You gonna let me continue working? Oh, thank you. You gonna let me finish work? Or are you gonna stay here this whole time? Am I gonna be stuck holding you this entire stream? Is that what's gonna happen? Very cute. Time to do work. It is. Time to do work. It is. All right, let's do some work. Come on. Let's put you in the window. Where were we? We are indeed blessed. Trenton, that knife is beautiful, by the way. I cannot wait to mess with that. That's going to be a very exciting project. He went over to the window. Have a little, I don't think my microphone is picking it up. I think I have the filter set. I don't know if you can hear the birds outside or not, but they're very vocal today. Again, with the card inserted in the preceding card slot, we're going to work this one down over top of it. And on something like this where there's only 2 card slots, that matters a lot less. But for example, with that last one I did, that big passport wallet, that one was definitely something where you would absolutely need to do that to account for the bulk that would go behind them. When you start stacking cards on top of cards on top of cards, you end up with quite a lot of thickness behind that. The birds shouldn't trigger the microphone on their own, but they probably come through when I'm talking. I think the filter should prevent them from being able to broadcast on their own behalf. Now, when we take that card out, let's see if I can get the... You can kind of see how you get a little bit of that rise on that outer card slot there from the extra width that's been glued down there. And that ensures that whenever there's a card in here behind it, it is easy to insert one in the one in front of it. And naturally, over time, they do stretch a little bit, but you kind of want to make it... It's just a nicer ease of use accommodation for the end user there, I find. And like I said, on some of them on larger wallets, it is pretty necessary to do it, or you'll have an unholy time trying to fit cards in that. So it's time now to go ahead and trim this. I'm going to double check against my template. Where did I put it? This is one of my standard designs, so I have this one made up in acrylic, which is really, really nice. I tend to make quite a few of these, and this is actually the same wallet I carry personally. Here, I'm going to give a final look over that. I want to double check this because occasionally, every so often, when you're gluing down one of these card slots, they'll stretch a little bit and the line won't quite be where you expect it to be. So you want to, every now and then, double check yourself before you double wreck yourself. Now we need to trim this inner edge here so we can do this stitch line here to hold the interior edge of the cards in. Just using kind of a long, thin, flexible ruler. So it lets me put pressure down on the front and on the back and kind of brace that in place. There. You can see these go together pretty quickly. That's one of the beauties of this particular design. Not only do they carry a lot and maintain a very small form factor, they're not complicated to put together either. I really like making them. Take our wing dividers, scribe a faint line there, get the chisels out, and again, as always, anytime you're punching around card slots, you want to index by the top and bottom edges of these card slots here. So I'm going to make sure that I'm going to line up here, so I'm going to make sure that I'm not piercing the top edge of the cards. I don't know how much, if you look pretty closely, you can see. You'll be able to see that I'm not piercing the edges there. Once I punch the holes, I'll give you a close-up and show you that there. Ben, on veg tan, I like to use the scratch-all because it's a pretty positive mark. It's easy to see. There are certain leathers to where the gel pen is much, much better, like a Chev or Saffiano, where you really struggle to see a scribed line. Having the actual inked line is much better. So really, it just kind of comes down to I use different methods for different leathers. There you go. That gives you an idea of what I was talking about there. We want to bridge those top edges of those card slots. We don't want to pierce through that. Down that line. I'm going to put the one I just made next to it, so I can make sure that I'm ending at the same spot. There, so you can see we've got the same length of line there. Now on this line, this is a very visible line, and it's also on very thin leather. If you take a look at that, this is the one that's stitched. That's all the thicker it is. That's about a 1/16 of an inch thick in total. So you're going to struggle a little bit to get a consistent stitch line on that. On the back here, I'll show you the back end of mine. I did pretty good on this, other than this is where my back stitch is up here. But again, this being the back side, you never see it, so it doesn't matter. But on this here, where you do, on very thin leather, hammering those stitch holes closed before and after does make a big difference in keeping that consistent. You don't need to get too aggressive with it, because on Buttero in particular, you can bruise it. You don't want to be really smacking it too much, just enough to close those up a little bit. It's a good thread there. Now this one I am going to adjust the camera so you can see it, because I'm going to do a hidden back stitch on this one. So once I thread my needles, give me a moment, I'm going to go to a black screen, I'm going to adjust the camera. I'll come back with it focused on me. I'll give you another look at that hidden back stitch, in case you missed it the other time I did it. Let's see, alright, give me a second, like I said. Pardon the noise, I'm going to put the black screen on while I rotate this camera here. I keep meaning to get a Velcro attachment for this just so I can pick it up and move it. But right now I just have it held on with masking tape, and that works fine. There we go. That's pretty good. Yeah, that's not bad. You also have to be a little delicate when you're starting that first stitch because you want to make sure that when you pull it tight, you're not pulling it out of line. So I usually do a cast on one side, kind of hold that in place. Here. But otherwise, I generally do not cast my stitches. In specific circumstances, if I'm having trouble getting it to lay down, or it's just not cooperating, I'll cast it, but otherwise, generally I don't. I'm noticing here as I do this, top edge of my bottom card slot, a little bit more glue. Before I stitch that down, scratch on just work a little bit, work a little dab of glue in there, down. And that's okay. If you're stitching along and you find you have some delamination, that's okay. That happens to me usually once or twice. I'm doing a particularly long stitch run or something that's got a lot of layers and things like that. They will occasionally delaminate. You know, it's hard to get glue exactly where you need it to go on a large project. Don't feel too bad, but do fix it. You know, take note of it and resolve it, and that's okay. Here. Got the two double stitches at the top of the card slots done. I'm going to work my way down. And when I get 3 stitching holes from the end, I'm gonna switch and do the hidden back stitch. I'll show you what I'm doing. As much as I can with this more or less static camera setup. Once that's done, we'll actually get to do what I specifically want to talk about today. I want to talk about burnishing. I see a lot of people struggling with it. And more concerningly, I see a lot of people trying to burnish things that they should not be burnishing. I've seen people burnish alligator. I've seen some bizarre things done. I've seen people try to burnish the backside of alligator with handy gum tragacanth, that was harrowing. So I'm going to show you as well how I burnish the backside of pieces, because you can see on these ones here, you can see the edge on the bottom there, raw flesh, and back here where it's actually been burnished a little bit. And I do that on veg hand wallets just because I like to get that flesh smoothed down a little bit. It makes it smoother to put cards in and out, and if you're putting your hands back there, in particular like you might be doing on these hidden slots here, it feels much nicer. So I've come to the end here. I'm 3 holes from the end. Normally a saddle stitch, as you would know, is done with 2 stitches. For the hidden back stitch, we're going to drop one of those needles. We're going to convert to a running stitch. We're going to use 1 needle. I'm letting that one hang. We're going to come back to it later. We don't need it right now. We're going to do these last 3... Oh, wrong way. These last 3 holes with just 1 needle. And the side you're viewing here is actually the back side. So this side's going to look a little rough. Again, just because the leather is so thin. But I'll show you the front when we're all done here. So basically, we're going to continue as we're going to go. We're going to go back and forth with the 1 needle. That's in on the right side. And on the left side. And on the right side. Now we've reached the end of the stitching run. Put up the camera so you can see it. You can see kind of how we've skipped a hole there. We're going to come back and fill that in now. We're going to go back in on the left, and as we're doing this, you can see on my end here, you notice I've got the needle almost at a 45-degree angle pointing downwards, and the reason I'm doing that is I'm trying to replicate the appearance of the slanted saddle stitch by directing the thread where to enter and exit. So I want it to enter high and exit low on the opposite side there. You can achieve that by angling the needle. So I'm going to pull down on this side, and I'm going to use my fingertip, or you can even use your awl, using my fingertip to hold it high on this end, pulling it down on the opposing end. When we come out, get that into focus. When you look at that, it's a little hard to spot with the black on black, but you can see that looking at the way that stitch goes, it has to be low on that side where that thread is coming out of. So we've pulled it down low, and when we push it back through the hole, we're going to push it in on the high end of it so that we get that replicated slanted stitch line without actually doing a saddle stitch. We're just mimicking one. Push it back through. We're going to push it through high, and again, same thing, I'm using my fingertip kind of help that up. Back and look at it there. So those last 3 stitches there are not a saddle stitch, they're a running stitch. And they look a little rough yet, but when we hammer them down, which as I mentioned is pretty important, they're going to look just right. So now, that thread that we dropped, we're going to pull that out a little bit. See there, hold that out a little bit, and now we're going to finish off the back stitch. Coming in, exiting low, entering high, exiting low. Where I basically have a cast on each end of this. I'm going to get my hands under it so you can see it here, because it's kind of hard to spot being black, but you can see there. I've basically got 2 small knots, one on each end there. We're going to take our glue. Not being shy with the glue. Make sure we get a good bit in there. Any excess we're just going to wipe away. Pull it tight there. Make sure that we see the glue come through the end there. Pull it tight. Snip it. Forgive me, I'll try to show you this, but I kind of have to work quickly on this one here. Taking my awl, and I can see a little bit of the end of the thread still poking through. Take my awl, push that back into the stitching thread, into the hole rather. Again, while that glue is setting, hammer it. So give me a second here, I'm going to rotate the camera back down so you can see this. I'll hammer the rest of it on camera so you can see the change there. Give me a second here. We're going to go back to a black screen while I rotate my camera again. Oh, that should be. Let's see. Get it right, that should be more or less serviceable, I think. I got it in the right spot, do I? But that looks off to me. Oh. Alright. Before I go further, I see there's some questions in the chat. Let me take a look and read those real quick. The idea, so start with Ben first, the idea of doing the back stitch, ideally that if you're using the right thread for the right product, thread really should not wear out. Linen thread will very, very quickly. I used to stitch wallets with linen thread. That was a mistake. Don't do that. This is a bonded polyester thread. This is Venimo number 8 bonded thread. And this is very durable. If it's done right, the thread should be more durable than the leather, which is saying something. In areas of excessively high abrasion or things like that, you will wear through it eventually, but that is something that should be fixed with design. Your design should try to avoid putting the thread in those positions where it would be worn out. If a thread breaks or wears out, obviously you should fix it, but the backstitch really shouldn't factor into it. It really is just a means of securing the thread line in place. I have seen one or two, like I said, some of my linen wallets that I did early on, I have seen the linen wear through on that, but none of the back stitches have ever come out. It's always been an area, again, that was high abrasion, that was poorly designed on my part, that I kind of learned through doing. Consequently, I never use linen for pretty much anything. I just do it only for... There are certain applications for it. Some bags and things like that, you can use it because they're not seeing the same kind of daily pocket abrasion that a wallet does. I know my friend and mentor Ben Geisler uses linen thread for his saddles. That's a traditional way of doing that, and he has a good reason for it. Not only are his stitches recessed, they're in a grooved line, they're also aggressively waxed by his sewing machine, so they basically get glued into the stitch holes. So that even if the thread does wear out, it basically works almost like a shoe peg. It continues to bond even so. So the back stitch, like I said, it is a means of only securing that thread line in place. It shouldn't wear out. Like I said, if the thread is going to wear out anywhere, it's probably going to be somewhere that's folded or bent or getting excessive abrasion. And even then, if it's the right thread, it really should not. It should last a very, very long time. Let's see. The Ritza thread I haven't had a whole lot of experience with. I know it's very heavily waxed, so what you might be seeing there, you might be compressing some of the wax a little bit, and that might be why you're losing some of the gloss for that. This thread is lightly waxed, but not enough for it to matter. Hey, it's the man, the myth, the legend himself. So I've heard him talk about that enough to where I think I can recite it by rote now, so I'm glad I got it right. Finish the hidden... Yeah, I'd be curious to see how you're doing it, Jeff. Like I said, that's the method that was taught to me. I've refined it over a couple years of doing it now to where I generally only I know where my back stitch is now, so I think I've got it pretty good. Let's go ahead and hammer the rest of this down now. This hammer I got actually is from Ben, so he does take these and sell them, and you can see, even though mine is kind of screwed up a little bit, because I've got some glue stuck to it. I need to polish it a little bit more. Ben sells these for, I forget what he sells them for, but this is my thread hammering hammer. The size, you're asking about the size of what? If you're asking about the size of the thread, this is size number 8. Vinimo number 8. That's 0.45 millimeter. I used the Phil's thread. I don't really care for it that much. I actually have something I did use it on. I'll find it here. Let me hammer this and I'll grab it. There's our 2 pieces there. I think I put my camera upside down. That's why it doesn't look right. I put the thing upside down. Hold on, let me fix that real quick. Aha. Okay. I was gonna say something just didn't look right about that. There we go. Perfect. Let me grab the thing I did with Phil's. I can find it. I did this as an experiment over the winter time. This is actually done with Phil's linen. And this was something I said I was never going to do. I made a reverse shell cordovan card wallet. Just because I figured, well, it's probably not something I'm going to sell just because it's kind of an experiment. So I did this with linen. And I really don't like linen anymore. A lot of people talk about, oh, it's so nice to stitch with. I don't think it's that nice to stitch with. Especially the Phil's, because you tend to get... this started happening more recently, I think, in the past couple of years. It seems like their quality control has gone down the tubes, and you tend to get a lot of lumps and bumps in the thread that just make it not nice to work with. But this was just some shell cordovan I had sitting around here. I did this just to say I had done it, then I'll probably never do it again. Unpopular opinion, I really detest shell cordovan. I don't like working with it. For the price point, I would rather work with alligator. It is better in every respect, I think, but people seem to really enjoy it, so I don't know. Put that away there. Where was I here? Got distracted by the gas meter reader. There was a question. I think I've missed a question, and I can't... are there any items I make in which I would use linen? No. For what I do, no. I don't see any reason to use it. I used that one there because I had it... My wife wanted a clutch made, and we looked high and low to try and find the right color, and the only color that she found was, of course, only available in a full spool of Phil's linen, so I have the entire spool that I've almost never used, and I said, might as well make some use of this, so I did it for that. Go ahead and turn the creaser on. So the next step we're going to do, before we get to burnishing this, we're going to do the crease first. And I like to crease before I burnish, only because I find that if you've burnished the edge already and you go to crease it, you have much less friction. And that means that occasionally your creasing tip can slip off the edge, and then you've got a real mess on your hands. I always crease before I burnish, just because I like that little bit of extra friction, extra grip on the edge there to hold that creasing tip in place, keep it from slipping. We're going to let that warm up real quick. Something else I was going to mention. I'm going to talk about something. Oh, I do know what I was going to talk about. Grab a piece of it here. I was reading the newspaper at my mother's the other day. Here. Perfect. I'm not actually from Youngstown. I'm from a suburb of Youngstown, basically an adjacent small city. And we used to have, many years ago, a tannery here in my little podunk town. It was called the Ohio Leather Company, and they made shoe leather. And from what I've come to understand, it seems like they kind of pioneered early use of chrome tanning practices and things like that. So it's very interesting to see. And I discovered that the Girard Historical Society actually has a small little display set up at the library for the Ohio Leather Company. I have a bunch of stuff hanging on my wall about it. But the most interesting thing I have is my great aunt didn't work there herself, but as many people in Girard do, they know someone who did. And she ended up having all of these, they're about the size of an 8x10. They're sample sheets of leather. And most of them are dated. So this one here, if you can see it, this one's dated September 20th, 1968. Bison calf is what it's called. They're calling it Monticello or Hanover or something like that. But it looks brand new. And when I was first starting out, she gave me a stack of this about the size of a couple different encyclopedias thick, of all this leather dated back from 1954 to 1971 when the tannery finally closed. It's completely gone now. It burned down about 20-some years ago. And they're actually trying to repurpose the land now into a park, which, boy, they're going to have a heck of a time doing that, because, as you know, with chrome tanning, especially early chrome tanning, it's rather unkind to the environment. And it was funny, we just had a massive scrapyard fire here the other day, which you may have heard of on the news. And a lot of the old-timers in Girard were talking about, that was nothing. I remember waking up every day and seeing the pollution from the leather works, back in the 50s and 60s. And it's like, that was just kind of how it was then. They didn't really consider too much about what they were doing to the land around them or to the air. But this one here, if you look at it, this is the very old style. You can just see it on the edge of the blue core chrome tan. And I have a bunch of it. I was making wallets out of it early on, which I kind of regret doing. I feel like I used some of the best pieces of it then. But I'm saving it for the right application. I want to make a couple of wallets out of some of this stuff, 50, 60-year-old leather that you can never get again. And, I mean, once you brush it, it looks, you take some of the bloom off, it looks brand new, and it works great. So, again, most of them have these very cool dates on the back, handwritten dates. Again, this one's September 20th, 1968. The majority of them seem to be from 68 and 69, and a couple really gnarly pearlescent metallic ones from the early 70s. That seems to have been the end of the tannery. So, almost everybody in Girard either worked there or knows someone who did work there, so it's a big part of our local history. So I'm excited to go down there and see what they've got at the library and introduce myself and see if I can't Can't learn something I didn't know already. By now, our creaser should be warmed up. Let's go ahead and do that. As usual, I use the round tip for everything because I'm left-handed, and the tips are made for right-handed people. So I find the round one works very nicely for me. And doing a lot of stuff with a lot of radii, it works very well for working around round corners and things like that. So to start with, as always, we're going to start on the back side. And the reason I do that is because this creaser, this mason creaser that I have, has some flaws with temperature regulation. It will tend to climb if you let it sit for a little bit. I always crease the backside first, number one, because the particular tip I'm using rounds the back a little bit, and number two, Buttero burns very easily, especially the yellow. I'm using the same tannage of leather, black and yellow, but the two different colors are dramatically different. The black is finished much, much more than the yellow, whereas the yellow, other than just having a dye put over it, is not finished much at all. And what that ultimately comes down to meaning, effectively, yellow will burn very easily, and the black will still burn, but less easily. So I run over the backside first to bleed off any residual extra heat that might have built up while it's been sitting there, and I also round the backside a little bit. Kill two birds with one stone. But the big thing you want to avoid is you want to avoid burning the visible surface of it. Work out the outside now. Take that over the edge, try to get as close to that edge of the card slot as I can. When you're going over these where the card slots are stacked, you want to work a little bit slowly. Even though these are flush, you can still, weird things happen when it goes over that little bump there. I want to make sure that it doesn't jump to the side on you. With certain colors of Buttero, again, black being one of them, you can kind of work that crease out. But on one of these, on yellow or whiskey or something like that, if you make an errant crease, you're done. It's over. You remake the part. I think that looks as good as that needs to. Got the creaser off, so now we're actually ready to get to where the thing I was going to talk about. We're going to talk about the burnishing here. And before I do, as I mentioned earlier, cats. We're going to police up our thread and our needles and put those away. They're just taking up space anyway. There. So we're going to do the inside edge of these two assemblies now. Hand this out. And as I mentioned before, a lot of people tend to go crazy over Tokenol, and certainly with good reason. It is a wonderful product. But I think you do yourself a disservice by using it for the whole burnish process. You certainly will use a lot more of it if you use Tokenol from start to finish, rather than using another medium like water to do it. So that's what I'm going to do. I say that looks as good as it needs to because I know if I tried, I could probably get a deeper crease out of that. But when you're doing that, anytime you're applying a lot of pressure, the more pressure you apply to that, the more risk you add of slipping and ruining it. So one thing I learned from painting cars for the better part of 20 years is stop when you're ahead. When it looks good, that's good. Don't go any more than you need to because you will just break your own heart by doing that. So this looks great. Happy with that. Let's go ahead and burnish it and not do anything we don't need to do lest we screw it up. So I've got a little bowl of water here, and probably no good way of me showing that, but I take that and I actually put a little drop. Surface tension is your best friend. So just a little drop of water on the end of your finger is all you need. A little more than I need on that. We're just going to take it, run that over the edge there. And because this is so thin, we're actually going to burnish this flat. I'm going to start with the back. I'm going to round that over a little bit, flip it over, and just pressing my canvas up against it. Then once we've done that, take it very carefully, kind of work over the edge there, Now it's kind of hard to tell because that's pretty thin. Some people would take a look at that and say, yep, it's burnished, that's good enough, we're going to stop there. We're not going to stop there. Let's go ahead and do the other one again. Little bead of water. Using surface tension. We don't need any special tool other than our own fingertip to do that. No need for Q-tips or things like that. Here. This one you can kind of see. Try to get the light on it just right. You can see that one there. That one darkened down pretty good. And again, as I had mentioned, some people would look at that and say, yep, that's burnished, that's good enough. We're going to go further. The key to a good burnish, it starts with two things. Number one, it starts with having a flush cut. So you notice when I had everything, and you can see on the edge here, my margin is actually well inside of where my actual edge is. That's because we want to cut this flush later. But we did that on this inside edge. That gives us a nice, true, smooth, flush edge. That's the first part. The second part is that you have to work that edge a little bit more. You have to sand it. But doing so with just your fingertips is not enough. You need something hard behind it, so you need a block. This is a block I got, I believe, from Artisan Leather Supply. But you can also use a ruler, just a piece of wood. It literally does not matter, as long as you have a dense surface behind your sandpaper. And when it comes to sandpaper, lower grit does the hard work. I see a lot of people making the mistake of thinking, oh, why does my burnish look good? I sanded it for 2 hours with 1500 grit. And why doesn't it look good? You know, that should have really smoothed it out. And what you've done is, all you've done is polish something that was not smooth to begin with. The lower grit does very, very little work. Almost all of the work is for... The higher grit does very, very little work. The lower grit does most of that. Generally, the purpose of the high grit is to remove the evidence of the work done by the low grit. So I'm going to start with a fairly aggressive grit for this, 320. You could go lower. I wouldn't go too much lower. There are cases where I've gone down as low as 80 grit on something that was exceptionally rough and also very thick. For something like this, for most wallets, there's really no reason to go below 320. You just basically cause more work for yourself. We're going to take the block, and on this one here, this one is pretty good already. We're not really trying to do too much work to it. I'm just going to follow parallel with the edge here a little bit. You notice I'm doing it in a couple different angles here. I'm doing it flat. I'm also coming on the 45s a little bit to round that. We burnished it and we immediately undid our burnish. Why did we do that? Leather, when you're trying to sand it, does not generally like to sand too well, especially with a lower grit like this. You'll mushroom it, you'll just kind of make a lot of dust, and you really won't get very far. The advantage of burnishing it first, even just that very quick and basic burnish, is even though it's not a very nice burnish, you have compressed the fibers of the leather a little bit. You have aligned them in a way that makes it a little denser and a little easier to sand. So the result being that when you actually hit it with sandpaper, you actually do something. If you just take a raw edge like this and sand it with 320, you'll spend a lot of time making a whole lot of dust and just make a big mess. Pretty much where you'll end up with. So again, we compress the leather fibers with just a quick and dirty burnish first, and then we go back and sand it. Hit this again. Again, we're going to go parallel, work it around on 45s, get a little bit of a curve into it. Now we're going to do another burnish on this. Again, just using water. And what you'll notice as you're doing this, other than by looking at the actual burnish, one way you can tell if what you're doing is having an effect, you can gauge how much water you're using. And you'll notice that at the start, you'll need to use actually a fair bit of water before it will actually do much. Whereas as you start to burnish it, you'll notice it will actually bead up on the surface and not penetrate as deeply. That means you're starting to get a dense, compressed fiber edge there. And that's what you want to work for. So again, on something this thin that you can't really hold in your hands too easily, we're going to burnish it flat against the block. That there looks, that's looking pretty good. You can see how dark that is there. Pretty good. Now this one here, see that little light spot right there, right where my index finger is? I'm going to hit that with a little bit more. Hit that a little bit more. When I want to cut, when I want to actually cut, I'm going to go perpendicular to the edge. I need to take this down a little bit. I must have some glue build up or something like that on the edge here. So when I actually want to aggressively cut the surface, you don't go parallel to it, you go perpendicular. That gets you the maximum usage of your sandpaper. That took care of that. Looking pretty good there. Now, we're still not done. People think that, oh, you just do it real quick and that's it. Burnish is quick and easy and done. Nope. You'll spend as much time actually working on a burnish as you will working on edge paint. It's just a lot more fun. I'm looking at this here and I'm trying to decide. I think I want to bevel this edge. You notice I haven't done any edge beveling yet. The reason for that is when you're doing this aggressively, these kind of early aggressive burnishes, almost no matter what, you will mushroom that edge a little bit. When you get down towards your final burnish, which we're actually just about to, then you take it with the beveler and you just cut away any mushrooming you've done already. What I'm going to do, I've got the creaser cold. Before I do this, I'm actually going to run it over with the creaser again, just to darken that line a little bit. Again, the creaser's not hot, it's cold. I'm just using pressure, no heat on this. A little more clarity to that crease line. Really want to... I think I do. I think I want to do that. And I'm making multiple passes on that because I'm actually not using the full depth of the edge beveler there. It's kind of lightly gliding over it, and I'm really only trying to catch any areas that have been mushroomed over. I'm not trying to fully bevel the edge. I've actually got one edge of the beveler resting on the granite piece, and I'm rocking it. I'm adjusting it back and forth to control the depth of that. Actually not catching anything there, so there must not be anything. Alright, I like that. So, we've hit it twice with 320 and water. We're going to hit it again. Now we're going to move up a grit. We're going to move up to 600. And the purpose of the 600 is to remove any residual sanding marks that may be left from the 320 grit. Ben, self-taught is a bit of a misnomer. I would say the better answer to that is I have not had any instructional classes or training or things like that. But I would hesitate to use the term truly self-taught by virtue of the fact that, again, one of my teachers is in here, Ben Geisler, and any number of other people in the Leathercraft Discord who are continually refining technique and generously sharing that knowledge with everybody. So I would say I benefit from the knowledge of many, many people, but I have never sat down with one person and had a lesson or a class or things like that. I don't really do classes. I'm not really the kind of person who can sit still and listen to someone, which obviously did me no favors during during my time in school. I just kind of generally like to figure things out on my own. So we hit that with 600. We got that pretty nice and smooth. Again, still water. No tokenol yet. This here, now I'm not going to do it flat. I'm actually going to take the canvas and pinch it over the edge. I'm not really trying to do too much pressure. We're more trying to get light friction and heat. You don't need to press a lot. You just need to generate some friction. By doing it this way, by actually bending it over the leather, you continue to round that edge. That's looking, you can see on the light there, I rotate it, we've got a really nice, you can see the way the light is catching that. We already have a pretty nice shine on that. We're still not done. We're not done yet. Do one more. Here's the other side. Again, this is a water burnish pass over 600 grit sandpaper. Again, taking the canvas, folding it over the edge, and you have to be very delicate with this, because if you slip, you'll bend the whole thing and put a lovely crease in it. So let's go put these together. We'll try and catch the light again with that. These are really too thin to show much. I picked only one side to bevel on this because these are very thin. The inside edge is not something you see. It doesn't really matter. So I'm only really beveling what I need to do. When you're using a beveler on something that is this thin, there is great risk of damaging it. If the beveler slips or you gouge too much, you can easily go through an entire layer of leather, which is not good. That doesn't make anybody happy. So I generally err on the side of less risk and only bevel it if I really need to. So the only reason I actually beveled it on this time was because we had a little bit of mushrooming just from the burnishing. And the purpose of our bevel on that was just to cut that mushroom away. Now we're going to do the actual final pass. We're going to go up a grit again. Draw a little piece here. I have big pieces of sandpaper. This is usually all I use for it. So this is 1500. Now we have an edge that is true, that is smooth. There are no bumps in it. There are no high or low spots. So when we hit this with 1500 and we polish it, that's what 1500 does. 1500 effectively removes so little surface that it is an abrasive polish at that point. When we hit it with the tokenol then, we'll actually have done something with this 1500. We'll have done what it was intended to do. And we're going to go back over the one we just burnished. 15. And now we're going to use the tokenol. So this whole time we've used only water. Now we're going to use tokenol, and again, same kind of thing. No need to do anything special with it. Here's all the amount of tokenol I'm going to use. I just put a little bit of dab on my finger, and that's actually more than I'll need. I'll probably be able to do both with just this. The way I like to apply tokenol is, again, surface tension. Stick it to your finger, and then pinch your thumb and your index finger together. And you basically create a little channel that you can run down the edge of it there. There we go. We've applied it. Go ahead and take this. Again, light pressure, but speed. Light pressure, but speed. You can even, when you run your finger over that, you can feel that is very smooth, very shiny. We'll do it again. So again, tokenol. I actually did have more than I needed on that one. Here's about all I need for that. That's all I'm going to use. Again, pinch it between your thumb and your forefinger. Create a little channel. Spread out a little bit with your index finger. Light pressure and speed with the canvas. So for all that, we burnished that. I think four separate times we burnished it. Maybe 5 if I'm counting incorrectly. We only used tokenol on the very, very last bit of it there. But when we look at that, so again, I'm going to take it, I'm going to rotate it. So watch, the best way to judge this is watch the reflection of the light when I rotate it. Watch as it catches the light from outside. You can see there's no weird shadows or things like that. That's because the edge is actually smooth and also true. There are no lumps or bumps or things like that. So to better illustrate that, I think what I'm going to do, I think I'm going to take some scrap and make a larger piece here. We'll glue it together here, and let's try that. See what I've got in my scrap drawer here. Anything in here that will burnish? Here. Yeah, this will work. This is a piece of this is kind of a rough piece of bridle. You can see on the back here, this is fairly fibrous. This will actually be kind of a difficult burnish because it's kind of a little bit loose. It's not super dense. It's a little kind of spongy. That will make it a little tricky to do that. So that'd be a great example. We're gonna get something that we can actually see here. Let's see. Yeah, that'll be perfect. That'd be a great example. Go ahead and scratch this up. Hold on. Hold on. Hold the phone. It's a big chap. Hello, chap. Yes. You're very cute. Why would you be so cute? Come just to say hello, or could it possibly be? Could it possibly be that you're asking me to do something for you? Could that be it? Oh. Slippery. You're like a big fat snake. Big fat snake today. There you go. Well, you're an acceptable boy. Big fat boy. Yeah. All right. I have to do work. Do. Thank you. Very cute. That's very cute. All right. You gonna watch the birds? You gonna watch the birds and let me work? Okay. Yes. Those two things we put together are going to be glued side by side, and they will be the interior of the wallet. What I'm doing right now, I'm just putting together a better, more visible example for this burnishing process, and that's what I really want to cover today. And I've deliberately kind of chosen a rougher piece of bridle. It's got a bit of loose grain. In fact, you can kind of see here how loose the grain is. Ah! Another convert to the Harbor Freight 60-inch 4-drawer hardwood table. Yes, my knees do hit the drawers. It's less of a problem with me because I'm only 5 feet tall, so it's not really that big of a deal. I can get pretty close to it. But anybody who is bigger than me, you would probably have some difficulty with it. I don't find that to be that much of a deal breaker, but somebody might. I don't really have a good idea for getting around that, unfortunately. But I love this table. It is fantastic. I cannot recommend it enough other than that. So again, all we're doing here, we're putting together a quick example for this burnish, just because I don't think we'll get to it in time. We would actually show you the edge of everything else to be burnished, something that's actually really visible. So we'll do this. We'll take this burnishing class from the top. We'll talk about what's important to start with, how to finish it. Get slicker, really work that down. You want to have your layers glued as tightly and securely as you can. working that glue in there, pressing it down, really does matter quite a bit. There we go. So that's a pretty ugly edge right there. If you tried to burnish that, you can see that would not be a good burnish. But for some reason, I see people trying to do it. Don't try to burnish something that looks like this. You need to get it smooth first. And beyond smooth, the correct term for it is you need to get it true. There's a difference between smooth and true. I'm going to let this glue set for about a minute. I'm going to mute my microphone. I'm going to grab a drink of water and hit the head. So I'll be back in about 60 seconds, and we'll go ahead and we'll start burnishing this. So I'll be right back. All right, sorry about that. So, water real quick. So as I mentioned before I went away, there's a difference between smooth and true. Which one do you want? Both. But you want to start with a true edge. And the best way to describe that, again, going back to bodywork and car painting, the best way to look at the difference between that is you can have a car with paint that is smooth and shiny. But when you get down and look at it, you'll see ripples and waves in the body and things like that. And that is not a true surface. A true surface is when you look at it and you can see your reflection in it and it's shiny because it's smooth. But also when you look at it, there are no ripples or waves in it. And that really is more important than having a smooth edge. That's why we work with low grit rather than high grit. Low grit will give us a true edge. High grit will give you a smooth edge. Again, both are needed for a good burnish. But to start with, we start with a true edge. The easiest way to do that is to cut your pieces oversized. You can see here, you can see my margins. If you look very closely, you can just see where my scratch all is described, the margins there. I generally go about 1/8 of an inch oversized, so that you can trim them flush, and therefore more or less true. Even doing that, you don't get it 100% true, which surprises people. The act of punching holes, working it, just moving it around in your hands will cause those layers to shift a little bit. So the more layers you have, the more work you'll have to do to get that true. But starting with a flush cut is the easiest way of doing this. So we're going to do this now. Like I said, if you're just joining us, we're going to do a quick burnishing test. This is about 1/8 of an inch thick, and this is 3 layers of kind of rough bridle. There's some loose grain in there. There are some creases, like some stretch marks into that. These are not great pieces of bridle, but we can get a pretty nice edge out of it, even so. So we're going to take this, and to start with, again, we'll presume, this is just a made-up thing, but we'll presume we've given ourselves about 1/8 of an inch overhang, trim away. So we're going to start with that. Take just a straight edge on our knife. So there we go. So now we've cut, and this is a pretty good flush edge. It could still be better. If you have a lot of edge difference that you need to clean up, you can use a planer. This is an Okada planer. These are very expensive for some reason, but they are nice. They're worth the price of admission. I got mine secondhand, about $50, and that was a great deal. I think they usually MSRP for around 80 to 100. Get one. I think everybody should have a planer. If that's a little too rich for your blood, I made one. Harbor Freight has these little guys, and I took mine and modified it quite extensively. This is from a set of the $15 Harbor Freight mini planers, and they come flat. They don't look like this. I took a file to it and modified it and made mine kind of resemble the same rough shape as the Okada one, and polished it and made it look nicer. The blades are not nearly as nice, and I suspect that's where all of the cost is in this blade, because this is a very easy to sharpen and very long-lasting blade. This one is not. You can literally see the burrs on it when I first got it. But if you want something that's quick, if you don't mind doing a little bit of metal work yourself with the file, kind of shape this to something, these cheaper planes can be effective. Let's see if I haven't used it in a while. Let's see if it still works. Yeah, working pretty good. You can see they can take quite a bit off of an edge there. If you have something that's very, if you have a very thick edge, you've had to make multiple cuts and maybe your blade wasn't perfectly straight through and you've got a lot of gaps and low spots, a plane is a great way to start. This one here, I don't think we need to. That looks pretty good to me. I don't think we're going to bother using the plane on it. I think we're just going to keep it as it is and go directly to the sanding. Clean up our mess here. Even after having just cut it flush, I still like to take the sandpaper to it, again, using a block. We're going to work parallel to it, work it down just a hair, just to pick up any rough edges that might have popped up during there. And this being a little bit thicker, I think we will go ahead and bevel both sides of it. This is a Barry King size 00 beveler. Take that off there. And just for the sake of making this a little easier to work with, I'm going to trim away these extraneous edges here. Here we go. Now, one thing we're going to take a look for before we really get into it, we're going to check and make sure that our edges are actually bonded. And you can see on the ends here, like I mentioned earlier, we got a little bit of delamination here. So before we do anything, we're going to work some glue into those edges there. Funnily enough, those are the only, well, other than the Arbor Press, they're really the only things I have from Harbor Freight to use. Otherwise, pretty much everything I have is special purpose for its intended use. I make a big deal out of using the right tool for the right application, but I am realistic about a plane simply being a plane. That's why I have that little guy there. I mostly did that as a curiosity experiment, and because I like things that are made out of brass. I can't get away from liking shiny things, so that's why I have that. A workbench is a workbench. An arbor press is an arbor press. So, go ahead and take our thumb, pick away at the edge. Nothing else is lifting, so I think we've got our edge pretty much laminated properly. Now, after gluing that, those edges always shift a little bit, so we're going to hit it again with some sandpaper. Working parallel, sanding parallel to the edge, and working around the 45s. So now we're ready to start actually burnishing. This is something we can actually see a little bit of. Take our water. And you notice how this is pretty greedily kind of absorbing that water. You want to get it spread more or less consistently across the surface. You don't want to soak it, but you do want to get everything evenly darkened and have a bit of water on the edge there. Take our canvas. Working around the edge. So that's better. And get some light on it. So now when I look down this edge, I can see a lot of high spots. I can see a lot of shadows. And also a lot of low spots where there are areas of kind of looser grain that didn't quite get burnished too much. And you can look at that and you can see the lighter areas in here. These lighter areas are low spots that really didn't get caught too much by the canvas. But now that we've given that a good, quick, basic burnish, we can hit it again with our sandpaper. This time, now that we've identified some areas that are low, we want to actually cut down. We're not going to run perpendicular, we're not going to run parallel to the edge anymore. We're going to run perpendicular with the sanding block. I'm going to take it, run perpendicular to it. And the reason for this is you get a more efficient use. You're maximizing your use of sandpaper on one pass. You're getting, basically, you can get about an inch at a time, but you're hitting it with the full 3-4 inches of your piece of sandpaper just by going back and forth like that. Whereas if you were to do it this way, you're only using basically the middle part of this piece of the sanding block. So this cuts a lot faster and a lot more efficiently than sanding in the other direction. Sometimes what I'll do, being used to block sanding, I'll go in the next pattern. Kind of get a bit of both. There we go. That took that down pretty nicely. Let's hit again and see what that looks like. Putting water over it, and you can see it's still pretty thirsty. It absorbs that water pretty quickly. Let that soak in for a minute. And pretty much immediately, that's a dramatic improvement. So you can look at that now. You can see that edge. You see a lot less striation in there. All the lines where the leather, where the flesh side of the leather is back there, you can see that all looks pretty nice and consistently colored. It's getting much darker, and we're getting a good shine out of that when I rotate it there. Watch the way the light reflects over the edge there. A lot of people would have just done single pass with water or with gum trag, called it a day. But even doing literally a single extra pass of sanding and burnishing already does so much more if you sand it right, if you sand it with the right grit. If you'd have tried to do that with a high grit like 600 or God forbid 1500, you would have had no difference. It would have looked almost exactly the same because you didn't actually remove anything. You just polished it. This here looks very, very good. Just for the sake of being thorough, I'm going to do one more pass with a 320. Again, same kind of thing, working perpendicular or in the next pattern. Go back, go parallel. Keep that edge rounded nicely there. Now again, this was a very rough piece of leather, so you can see how much on the bottom edge here the flesh is being pulled up. Let's take our beveler. We can't clean off a bunch of that. There. Go ahead and give it another pass with the water. Now you notice on that time, I was able to more or less cover that with a single application of water. That's because our fibers are getting denser, they're getting compressed more, there's less space for the water to be absorbed there, it's kind of skimming across the top. That's a good sign. As you burnish, you should be able to use less water to cover the same amount of surface. And one more time. Now for something this thick, you could also use a wood burnisher. The jury's kind of out on what works better. I myself like the canvas, and I think for the thinner weights I'm working with, canvas works much better. But that's just me. There we go, looking down the edge of that. Again, another look at that. Now, looking at it, you remember how, when we looked at this before, remember how you could kind of easily make out the different colors of the layers between there. There was the green and the paler, tan of the flesh, and the green in the flesh, and so on. Now, it's all getting to be kind of more or less one kind of consistent dark color and very shiny. Watch as I rotate that through the light there. Look at the way the light catches. That's what you really want to look at when you're gauging a car, either a car paint job or a burnished edge. Use the light to your advantage. Use the reflection to see. If there's a high spot or a low spot here, you will immediately see a reflection indicating that when the light hits it. Right now we're looking at that and we're seeing just a straight line light down the edge of that as we rotate it back and forth. And get up and look down. You'll look right down the edge of it. That's how you'll see anything. So we did that. That's a very nice edge. We did that with nothing higher than 320 grit sandpaper. Again, 320. People start with 600 or 1500 or 2000. Wrong move. This is all with low grit and just with water. Dremel burnishing has its place if you're doing a lot of volume or a long run. I think it's overkill. It is certainly overkill on what I do. It matters less on the burnishing implement and more on how smooth you get that edge. So the work is being done by the sandpaper, not by the canvas or the burnisher. The actual work is being done with this. This is what matters. You could do this with a Dremel or with a piece of wood or whatever, or with your fingertips. Ben often does it with a canvas glove when he does long runs of it. The burnishing implement matters much less than how smooth you get the edge with your sandpaper. So again, this is just 320 and water on bridle. Now, I think that's pretty good. I don't see any high spots. I don't feel any high spots. But when I look at this, even though that's pretty shiny, I know it can be shinier. Because what you're actually seeing, if you look at it from my perspective here, there's a bit of a haze to it. And that haze is actually sanding marks left by this fairly aggressive grit of sandpaper. Our next step is to work with removing that. We do that with the higher grit. So again, we're going to go back up to 600. You don't need a piece much bigger than this for most applications. Take that. We're not really trying to cut anymore, so we don't need to worry about going perpendicular to the edge. You can just run it parallel to it. Kind of working over it, and you're basically just trying to remove the evidence of the 320 grit. So all this is doing, this is actually getting into more polishing than cutting. You are trying to polish out the evidence of the sandpaper. So you notice as soon as I take that shine off there, you can see all the striation of the edges again, how that all disappears when we burnish it because we're getting the shine and the consistency of it. That's what that looks like underneath that. Let's go ahead. We're going to still sticking with water, but you'll notice when I put that water on it now, it practically beads up on there. It takes a hot second before it actually settles in there. That's good. That means we're getting this into a very dense edge. That already feels significantly smoother. I'm going to hit a little bit more water over that again. That. Again, there's 600. And again, we'll try to catch the light as we rotate it through there. It's a pretty good shot right there. Again, you're watching the way the light reflects over that edge. You're looking for high spots. You're looking for areas that do not reflect the same way, or don't reflect at all, in the case of usually a low spot, something that you didn't touch with the burnisher. If you had an edge that was super rough, you could hit it with a Dremel all you wanted. It really wouldn't matter. If the Dremel is not contacting a low spot, it's never going to burnish, no matter how much you try. Getting all of those low and high spots out with the sandpaper is what matters. And again, although I mentioned it before, if you're just coming in and catching this, a block is critical. You cannot do this with your fingertips. You cannot do it with your hand. You may think you are, but you're not. Even though your hand feels, the palm of your hand feels pretty dense, and there's bones and stuff in there, it will always naturally tend to follow the pattern of the surface underneath it. And over 20 years, I always thought that was crazy. I was like, that can't possibly be. But you block sand and wet sand and buff enough cars, you will learn that that is 100% true. You need a block. This is a purpose-made block. You can use a ruler. You can use a piece of wood. It does not matter. But you need something dense underneath that sandpaper for this to work. It will not work with your low grits. High grits, you don't need that as much, because again, you're not trying to, by that point, by the time you get up to 600 or 1500, you're not cutting anymore, you're polishing. When you are cutting with low grit, you must have the sanding block, or it does not work. All right, got that? Got it? Good. That's a pass with 600 in water. That's pretty good. I like that. We're going to move up to the 1500 grit now. We're going to try to really polish out the last of these sanding marks here. You always burnish throughout. So every time you do a pass with sandpaper, you always burnish it. Because again, when the leather's raw, it doesn't really do much. You could sand, like this raw edge here, you could try to do this. You could try to hit this with sandpaper. And if you have a Dremel with a sanding attachment, yes, you will bull your way through it, but it's not that efficient. You'll generally just make a bunch of dust. You'll make a lot of dust doing this way. Compressing and recompressing those fibers makes that edge dense, and it makes it respond easily to the sanding. And that's why I do it. So every time you hit it with the sandpaper, re-burnish it. Even if you just go over it real quick, it doesn't take more than 10-20 seconds to do that, just to get that edge re-slicked down. And every time you do it, you're further and further and further compressing the fibers. You're getting a dense shine and getting an edge that actually will respond to sanding. Howdy, Rushton. We're doing some burnishing. Oh, Mom. So we've moved up from 600. That's looking nice. A lot less haze there. I like that. We're going to hit this with 1500 now to really kind of get into our final. This will be our final burnishing pass. So we're finally going to stop using water. We're going to hit it with Tokonol here. Going over it with the 15. Oh, thanks for the sub, Dave. Go again. So we've taken, you can see the difference of that just from hitting it again, taking our shine away, going with the 1500 grip. But when you run over that, it feels very, very smooth. Now we're going to use the Tokonol, and again, this is about all you need. Just use your fingertip, get a little bead on there, pinch your forefinger and your thumb together. You can run it along the edge there, apply it. Spread out a little bit with your fingertip. That's it. So this whole burnishing process, that's it. That's the only amount of Tokonol we've used. Very efficient with that. And we're going to take it again. Looking at this point for the polish, we're looking more for speed. Looking more for speed from the canvas. Wow, that surprised even me how nicely that came out. We're gonna rotate that through the light. Watch the reflection of the light on the edge. A lot of people will try to tell you, oh, you got to use shell cordovan to get that kind of finish. That's false. You're not getting this kind of edge out of your Buttero or even your bridle, which is all this is, and this is loose grain bridle at that, you're just not burnishing it properly. You're just not spending enough time on it. Now we can go further than that. Here's another often misunderstood piece of equipment. This is half of, about a quarter of a Columbus mill wax bar. I belong to a number of Facebook leatherworking groups. If you use Tokonol throughout the process, you would get to the same point. But you would use a lot of Tokonol to do that. You saw how much water we used. you would get the same end result, but why use a product that you have to pay for if you can use water and get the same thing? That's basically the way I look at it. I used that whole thing to get this edge. I used the tip of my finger once to do that. That's a very efficient use of product. I've seen some people that burnish edges and give the customer a bottle of Tokonol with it. I don't really understand that. To me, that kind of seems like buying a car and giving them a toolkit to work on it. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Your edge should look like this. And there's really no reason that it can't if you just take a little bit of time and do it. Don't hit it with one pass and call it a day. Put an extra 10 minutes into it, and it'll pay dividends. It'll last a lot longer, and it looks very good too. Hey, there goes my dad. So we were going to get into further finishing of the edge. So we'll assume this is our finished product here, and we're going to do some actual finishing. We're getting it ready for shipping. Columbus mill wax, like I said, is a misunderstood product. And I saw somebody complaining about it on one of the Facebook groups saying, I don't get it. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't make any sense. There's a way to use it, and I'll show you how I like to use it. This is mostly paraffin, so you get a nice shine out of it here. You'll notice I've been using a piece of canvas to do this. I have canvas that is dry, and I have canvas that is for wax. This one I use only for waxing ends on it. And this process I'm going to show you works on both a painted edge and a burnished edge. On painted edges in particular, it works very well because even with the way I paint edges, you always get a little bit of, you always see a little bit of something in it. And the wax goes a long way to filling all those little spots in. And even on burnishing edges, it does the same thing. So we're going to take literally just a piece of wax and we're going to rub it against the edge. You could also try to rub it into the canvas and do it that way if it's something a little more delicate. This is dense enough to where you could just apply it directly to the leather. And you don't need a whole lot. You basically want to apply it until you see a haze of wax on the edge. When I turn that again, you can kind of see that it's become a little bit hazy. I'm taking one of my canvas that is made for using wax on there. We're going to burnish this. But there's the key to understanding to use this is that if you burnish it too much, if you burnish it like you were just burnishing an edge, you'll burnish all the wax away. You'll just remove all the wax and you'll have done nothing. And I think that's where people get confused, where they put the wax on and they go like that for 10 minutes, and then when they look at the end of it, they think they've done something, only to realize they've removed all of the wax. This is not something that you can see, and it certainly won't be something I can pick up on the camera, I don't think, but it's something that you feel. You will feel a point where moving the canvas back and forth, you'll feel it grip early on because the wax is not yet warmed up and it's not yet flowing, but at a point, you'll feel kind of a break where suddenly the wax will be in a liquid form, more or less, and that you'll feel it is flowing against the edge, and that's when you stop. And when you do that, you'll know you've done it if you actually take it and look at it, and the edge looks hazy. It will actually look like it is a dulled edge after you've put the wax on it. If you look at that, that means you've done it. So we'll see if I can convey that. Here, let's try this. It's gripping. You can feel it gripping. Right there, I felt it stop. I felt it actually begin to give. It started to flow. You remember the way this looked before? Here's all the shine we're getting out of this now. So you actually see there actually did kind of leave a hazy edge on that. You're not done yet, and I don't quite know why this works. I can't explain to you why this is. After you've done that, hit it with your fingertips. I'm not kidding you. Take your fingertip and just go over it like that, and it brings all the shine right back. And it should be nicer than it was before. And you can actually build this on top of it. So we're going to do it again. We're going to do another application of wax on top of that. Really get it on thick there. Really build it up. That's a pretty thick edge. So again, you should see, again, looking at the light there, you can see no shine to it. No shine at all. I'm moving that through the light. No shine on that. Hit it with the wax. It's gripping. It's gripping. Right there. Right there, when you feel the resistance go, when you feel that it's not giving you any more resistance, you want to stop right there. If you keep burnishing at that point, you'll basically just lift it all off and you'll have nothing left. So again, we've done that, and looking at it, we're going to move it through the light. You can see it's hazy. There's no shine to it. Hit it with my fingertips. Don't know why. Do a light, basically a fingertip burnish. I don't know why this works. We get a nice clean edge from that. And what that does, I'll try to rotate through the light here so you can kind of see what I'm seeing. See the reflection on that? There's not much light hitting that, but you can see the reflection of that. We get into some actual real light here. Closer here. You could use a glycerin saddle bar. I generally don't find much need for it. I don't really like the finish that leaves. And I think with that, I don't know enough about that to actually say for sure. I know that having used it in the past, I don't like it as much as this, but I would have difficulty explaining to you why I don't. So rather than say something that is wrong and talk out my rear end, I'm just going to say I don't know to that. But that looks pretty sharp there. There's one other thing we can do to make this really nice. And this is another thing that works on both painted and burnished edges like this. This is a trick my good dear friend Rushton in chat taught me. This is kind of the secret sauce. I'm not even going to try and pronounce this. That French stuff I don't do. But I use this on everything. This is a polish I use on literally everything except suede. Don't use it on suede. But it works great on pretty much all surfaces. Take a little bit of this. Wipe it on there. Let it set up for a second. And then, again, don't use the canvas on this. Just use your fingertip. That's kind of the secret sauce to really getting that nice. And again, that works on both painted or burnished edges. Just a little bit of polish on that at the end really does a number on it. So, like I said, just basic bridle, not even really particularly nice bridle, kind of loose grain, certainly pretty rough on the back. 3 layers of that, about 1/8 of an inch thick. If you're willing to put in a little bit of the work for it, that'll do it. I wouldn't say this is the mirror polish stuff. I've never done that with it. You could probably do that. I believe the shoe fellas will be able to tell you more about that. Getting a real honest-to-goodness spit polish out of it. But I like it on pretty much everything. Use it on alligator, Buttero, you name it. It's good. And that's the thing, when there's a lot of people kind of think that the polishing is just a one-shot done deal. It shouldn't be. It can be if you're lazy or if you just don't know any better. But if you want to actually really get something nice and something that will last a long time, you do it this way. In fact, I'll get my personal wallet here. Hang on. My own daily carry. And this is actually, I did not do as good of a job on this as I do now. I did these a little bit differently, but this is still something that was beyond a one-shot burnish. You know, use a bit of water and tokenol. People say that burnished edges don't last. This is 2 years of back pocket carry. I literally went and grabbed this from the edge there. I haven't touched this since I made it September of 2019. People who say that burnished edges do not last are not burnishing their edges properly. Is basically the end of it. Like I said, this is not a good edge. This is not an edge I'm proud of. You can see there. So what I'm talking about with high and low spots, you notice how by my finger here, do you see those little marks there? Those are low spots. And what that is, I'll tell you exactly what that is. That was when I used my planer and my edge was dull. I used it too much. I hadn't sharpened it, and the planer chattered, and actually left 4 or 5 little cuts in there that didn't get sanded out and burnishing. And that's why we use the 320 block. You're taking those out. That's what you're looking to get rid of. So like I said, this is not a good burnish, but you can see it is still burnished. You know, on the corners, it lasted there. Up here on the thinner parts, it lasted. This is 2 years of everyday back pocket carry. It's not even that I'm being that kind to it. I have about 12 cards in here. So You can get a burnish that lasts. And again, I haven't done a doggone thing to this. As an interesting experiment, let's see if, so again, showing how to use the light to your advantage to see it. Can you see it on there? Can you see on the right side there where my thumb is kind of pointing at it? Do you see where the chatter marks are from the planer? I'm curious to see if I can take those out now. Probably could. I'm sure I could, but let's see. You see what I'm talking about there? That's what I mean by using the light to your advantage. You want to look at it and try to catch errors and defects in it. Let's see. Let's just see what happens. Take cards out here. This is actually the same wallet I'm making right now. This is the mid wallet. This is 2 years of daily carry. I don't know why my cards do that black thing across the top edge there. But this is Whiskey Buttero. Again, 2 years daily carry. I really, really like the way whiskey ages. We're going to try and we're going to come back 2 years belatedly and see if I can fix one of my errors here. Try and get these marks out. So again, we're trying to cut. We're cutting with the sandpaper. So we're coming perpendicular at it. And you can see when I hit it there they are right there. There are the low spots. So we took away the shine on the top. There's the 4 or 5 low spots we're trying to take out. You want to sand until you don't see those anymore. And sometimes you have to do a couple passes of burnishing, and sanding until they're gone. Sometimes you'll sand so much that you think they're not there anymore, but they'll reappear when you burnish it. That's just the nature of the game. It takes a little bit. So looking at that now, looks like we mostly got that out. Let's hit it with some water and see what it looks like. Now, if you look very closely, watch as the light catches it. I'm going to rotate it here. Watch as the light catches it. You can still see them. Right there. Obviously, this is a lot easier for me to see having it in front of me and not being reduced down to 1080p. But right there, you can see them a little bit. So they're almost out, but not quite. We're going to hit it again here. We're going to hit it again with a little more 320. Again, we're cutting, so we're going perpendicular. That's probably enough. Hit it again with some water. You can see that didn't take too long to do. You didn't lose a lot of time by doing that. Pretty good. I like that. I'm not going to sand it yet. I'm just going to put a little bit of water down here just to kind of re-burnish that edge. Even out the consistency of that color a little bit. Hit it with, where'd I put it? 15. Where'd my 600 go? Oh boy. No. Tear some more off. Now we'll move up to 600 again for the purpose of removing sanding marks from that. Oh. Bit of water. You can see that water mostly just went right over the top of it and didn't absorb too quickly. Because this edge is pretty dense. Number one, from having been burnished already, although not that well. More so from having been sat in my back pocket for 2 years. So you can look at that, and even with just doing 600, you can see there's a pretty significant difference between what's going to be on your left side there and on the right side there. The left side is the one I just reburnished. The one on the right is the one I have been carrying for a while. And like I said, when I did this initially, I did not burnish it to this extent. I had not quite figured out my full process for burnishing yet. That looks more or less as it did when I made it. If you scroll back to 2019, you can see what it looked like when it was new. Those edges looked about like that. I think that's pretty good. I think I'll put my cards back in. Call it a day with that. Going on 2 o'clock here, I think we'll wrap it up here. I'm going to go ahead and glue these pieces in just so you can kind of see what the wall is going to look like. So now would be a good time if you have any questions about anything I did today, anything we covered, anything you'd like to know more of, let me know. Feel free to ask in the chat. Andrew, I've used beeswax before. I think I like the paraffin better. I find that the paraffin is a little denser, and I find that it does a better job of polishing and burnishing. I tend to prefer paraffin over straight beeswax. I suspect that the Columbus wax is a mix of both. That's what I actually used before. I hand-made a mix from some beeswax and some paraffin, and I went heavier on the beeswax than the paraffin. And in retrospect, if I were to do that again, I would do the opposite. I would go heavier on the paraffin than the beeswax. Thank you, David. That's very nice of you to say. Oh, talk about burnishing. Here we go. Here's one more thing we'll talk about real quick. This is actually going to be the Billfold for this. This is a case where you actually do use a lot of toconol. It works very well for this application. We're going to burnish the back side of this. This is just the raw flesh side of this. I think that's what we'll end up with. Since we're talking about burnishing, we started with burnishing and we'll end with burnishing. We're going to use some toconol. I'm just using my glue spreader. We're looking to spread this evenly along the back side. And while obviously this takes a lot more than doing an edge, it still doesn't take that much. This is, unlike the card slots, this is something you actually will see. You will be feeling relatively regularly if you're using carry cash. So this is something I like to do on these areas. Here. These outside edges we kind of want to leave alone because number one, we need to glue them. Number two, much of it's going to get trimmed away anyway. So we don't want to burnish it unnecessarily and we have to come back and scratch it again. Doing this, we're going to use the glass slicker. Get down. Using pressure and friction, you can be pretty aggressive with this. Burnishing refers to the act. What is actually happening there, what actually happens when you're burnishing with water or with toconol, it reacts with the tannins of the way these are so these are vegetable tannins, so they get some of those tannins from the natural processes, and it helps align the fibers of the leather. When you're getting a nice burnish, you're getting them all kind of laying more or less in one direction, and that's how you get them looking that nice shiny way with the nice dense edges there. Polishing is really just the effect of further smoothing that finish out. Somebody who's more well versed in the physics behind that could do a better job of explaining that than me, but that's the layman's portion of it. There's the finished side. There's the burnished side on the back. And that'll settle down a little bit. We still have a little bit of toconol being absorbed in there, but you can see how much shinier that is just from the flesh side there. Now when you reach back there and touch that, it's nice and smooth and you're not feeling a lot of rough fibers on the back there. I think that more or less does it. Any questions, please do feel free to ask. Like I said, feel free to ask in the chat or feel free to email me or get me on Instagram. Southwest Ohio, a pleasure to have you here. We're about to get our rain here in Northeast Ohio, so thanks a lot for that. So, I thank you all for joining me. It's always a pleasure to stream. I enjoy starting off the week this way. Good way to kind of frame the work week there. Hopefully that burnishing lesson was helpful to you. Glad you joined me, and I hope you learned something from it. Again, do feel free to email me with any questions, and I'll be happy to answer them if I can. So with that, I'm going to sign off here. I look forward to seeing you next Monday. There will be pictures of this posted in a couple of days, and pictures of that badge wallet again here for the next few days. I'm going to switch over to that and finish the painting on here. So, again, thank you very much, and hope to see you all again next time. Have a good day.